you could be on mute. So it looks like we're good to go. So I am going to call the meeting of the Narragansett Regional School District School Committee to order. And as per the emergency order from the Baker Police Administration that was issued on March 12th to modify the state's open meeting laws to allow us to carry out our business during COVID-19, we are holding this meeting remotely. With that, we will stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, and I believe we have a flag. There we go. Pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States
of America,
and to the republic
for which it stands, one
under
nation,
God,
under God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with liberty and
and
justice.
justice for all. Thank you, everyone. Just to note that this meeting is being live streamed as well as being recorded by Templeton Community TV. So people can be watching it on TCTV's YouTube channel and also through their Facebook page, and it'll also be available for viewing after the fact as well. And with that said, we will go into the first order of business, which is our reorganization of the committee. After our annual elections, the committee must reorganize. And as per our policies, the current chair just retains chair until we go to our first motion, which would be for one, the first part to nominate for chair for the upcoming year, and then a vote by the committee on that. So I would take a nomination from the floor for our chair for fiscal year 2021.
I nominate Margaret Hughes for chair.
I second the nomination.
Okay, so I have a first for Mrs. Chartier and a second. I'll give it to Mrs. Trifilo. I think she was a half a second ahead of you, Mrs. Mattson. Are there any other nominations for chair on the floor? Okay, seeing none. And as Mrs. Hughes, I would accept the nomination. So now we will vote on that, and we will do a roll call for Margaret Hughes to be chair of the Narragansett Regional School District School Committee for fiscal year 2021. Mrs. Mattson?
Yes.
Mrs. Chartier?
Yes.
Mrs. Trifilo?
Yes.
Mr. Mason?
Yes.
And Mrs. Hughes says yes. So we have a quorum, and Mrs. Hughes, myself, retains the chair for the upcoming year. I want to thank you all for the trust that you put in me. With that being said, we'll move on for nominations for vice chair. Do I have a nomination from the floor?
I nominate Rayanne Trifilo for vice chair.
I have a motion to nominate Rayanne Trifilo. Do I have a second? And I have a second by Mr. Mason. That was Mrs. Chartier. And any other nominations for vice chair? Seeing none, we'll vote. Mrs. Mattson?
Yes.
Mrs. Chartier?
Yes.
Mrs. Trifilo?
Yes.
Mr. Mason?
Aye.
And Mrs. Hughes says yes. So congratulations, Mrs. Trifilo. Happy to have you as vice chair once again.
Thank you.
I just want to do one piece of housekeeping because I want to apologize. Normally at the beginning of our recorded sessions, I introduce everybody who is on this call just so that people who might only be listening will know. So I just wanted to do that. From the school committee tonight, we have Mrs. Mattson, Mrs. Chartier, Mrs. Trifilo, Mr. Mason, and myself, Mrs. Hughes. Dr. Kazavant, Superintendent of Schools. Kate Calise, our Chief Academic Officer, we have Anne Marie Geister, our Business Manager, and Susan Varney is our super duper executive administrative wonderful assistant. We also have, I see Mrs. Parker is on with the NDEA and she'll speak later. We are awaiting another member from the school committee, so I'm sure he'll join us shortly. And I think I got everybody. I didn't leave anybody out, right? Okay, I think I did good this time. Last time I left someone off. Okay, so the next nomination for a reorg is secretary of the school committee. This position has typically been filled by our superintendent, and I would entertain a motion if someone so chooses to appoint Dr. Kazavant as the secretary of the school committee for the fiscal year 2021.
So moved.
I have a motion by Mr. Mason. Do I have a second?
Second.
And I have a second by Mrs. Trifilo. Just for the records, Mr. Marks has joined us. Good evening.
My apologies.
No problem. So the motion on the floor has been seconded for Dr. Casavant to be the Secretary of the School Committee for the fiscal year 2021. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, Mrs. Mattson,
Yes.
Mrs. Chartier,
Yes.
Mrs. Trifilo,
Yes.
Mr. Mason,
Aye.
Mr. Marks,
Aye.
and Mrs. Hughes says aye. So that was unanimous. Thank you, Dr. Casavant, for performing those services as our secretary. And we also have in the past appointed Susan Varney as our assistant secretary to the school committee. So I would entertain a motion from the floor if someone so chooses to appoint Susan Varney as the assistant secretary to the school committee for fiscal year 21.
So moved.
I have a motion by Mrs. Trifilo. Do I have a second?
Second.
And I have a second by Mrs. Mattson. Any questions or comments? Seeing none. Mattson,
Yes.
Mrs. Chartier,
Yes.
Mrs. Trifilo,
Yes.
Mr. Mason,
Aye.
Mr. Marks,
Aye.
and Mrs. Hughes says yes, and that was unanimous. Thank you, Mrs. Varney. Our next order of business is assigning the Mass Association of School Committees delegate appointment. This is the person who gets to go to the delegate assembly and vote on all of the resolutions that MASC puts forth. I have held that position in the past, but if someone else would like to do that, don't everyone jump at once. You certainly can. I'm happy to do it again, but if someone else does want to do it, I'm happy to have that happen as well. So I would take a motion on the floor to appoint someone for our MASC delegate.
I motion Margaret Hughes as a delegate.
Second.
All right, so I have a motion on the floor and a second to appoint myself, Margaret Hughes, as the MASC delegate at the MASC 2020 Delegate Summit. Was there anyone else wanted the position? I didn't see any big hands waving in the air, so I'm thinking no. Any questions or comments, concerns? Seeing none, we'll vote. Mrs. Mattson,
Yes.
Mrs. Chartier,
Yes.
Mrs. Trifilo,
Yes.
Mr. Mason,
Aye.
Mr. Marks,
Yes.
and Mrs. Hughes says yes, and I thank you for that appointment. I will represent us
Cool.
well. The next is the legislative representative appointment. As per our policies, we need to appoint someone to just kind of look after legislative items and issues that come forth and make sure the committee is aware of them. I would entertain a motion from someone to appoint one member of the committee to be the legislative representative. And I will do it if I will do it. So if someone wants to nominate me, that's fine.
Thank you, Margaret.
So do
Make
I
that
have,
motion.
was that a motion?
Yeah, so moved.
Okay, so Mrs.
Second.
Chartier, and I have a second from Mr. Mason. Any questions or comments? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mrs. Mattson,
Thank you, Margaret. Yes.
Mrs. Chartier,
Yes, thank you, Margaret. And yes.
Mrs. Trifilo,
Yes, and thank you.
Mr. Mason,
Aye. Thanks as always.
and Mr. Marks.
Thank you, Margaret. Yes.
And I will say yes and accept the appointment, and I will be sure to keep everybody up to date on legislative issues as they come around. Okay, just two more quick things before we get to our auditor report. The first is our subcommittees. We have various subcommittees out there and people are on them. I will send a separate email out to everybody with the committees and who's on them and ask if anyone would like to be, on a committee or moved off of a committee and maybe switch things around, but I'll do that in a separate communication. So people can give some thought to that. The second thing about subcommittees is I wanted to discuss with the committee, perhaps reinstating our finance subcommittee as a small group so we could be more focused. I just have a feeling there are going to be a lot of things this year that come up that we might need to have a little more attention to, and it might work better as a smaller committee, but I don't want to lose the finance committee meetings. So I'd want to retain those as a committee of the whole, focused just on finance. So I want to put that out there for everybody to think about. And I'll kind of outline what I'm thinking when I email everybody about the subcommittees and get your thoughts on that.
Margaret, just when you do that, I think I was on that before and I don't mind being on that again because my other committees are, other than the negotiations, are pretty low key.
Great, thank you. All right, and I'll solicit, who might be interested and whatnot. Thank you, though, Vicky, you've always been a great member on that committee. And then the last piece is there's a proposed school committee meeting calendar that's out there that pretty much follows our current schedule. So you'll see that on the agenda if you want to take a look, but we'll send out a formal notice of the meeting dates shortly once we go through these, and we'll probably add some finance meetings as well. So with that being done, we will move on to our regular business. Actually, we're going to skip regular business. We'll come back because we have our auditor with us tonight, Chad Clark from Roselli, Clark and Associates, CPA. They came in and did our audit from last year, and I would like to turn the floor over to Mr. Clark to speak to us about the audit report that he has since provided to us. Hello and welcome.
Great, thank you very much. Nice to see you all again. Can you all hear me fine?
Yes.
All right. So obviously things have been a little different since the year we audited, but so just as a reminder, we're going back to the fiscal year ended June 30th of 2019 when we're talking about these numbers, just to kind of reframe the context. I know it's backwards a little bit and things have been a little delayed. But overall, it was a pretty good year for the district financially. Your general operating fund ended the year with just under $1.2 million, which was up about $100,000 over the previous year. The school choice fund had just over $1 million in it at the end of that June of 19. And that was down slightly, about 43,000. Conversely, the other funds, non-major funds, those are more like your grants, your revolving funds, things like that, special revenue, capital project kind of things. That ended with about 390,000 in it, which was actually up 42,000. So that and school choice kind of washed each other out. Which ultimately resulted in overall about $100,000 increase net to the bottom line for the district in 19. Conversely, your E&D that was certified by the state for June 30th of 19 was 612,000. That was down about 23,000 from the year before. I don't see that as being any kind of a big problem. You still had a solid 600,000 there. And, down 23,000 is just part of normal operations. I would assess that at. So those are the numbers that are basically that we do as on the audit that are reported in line with how Anne Marie would give you the numbers. They're more UMIS based with a couple of slight adjustments. Then you flip over to like the statement of net position, statement of activities, and that's where we get into the GAAP numbers in the form of GASB accruals and adjustments. And the big ones on those are obviously, like we've talked about in the past, your OPEB, your pension. I would say your net OPEB, you were looking at 36.8 million as a future obligation. Keep in mind that's everybody you're employing right now. What it would cost years down the road when they retire and afterwards. For in the case of OPEB, primarily that would be like the health insurance that you're providing to them. That number was actually up about $1 million last year over the previous year. And what's kind of been going on with that is that the actuaries have been making some adjustments to the discount rates and some of the overall schedules that they use for life expectancy. But it's really the discount rate. They've kind of become a little more conservative across the board than they started out being. And what the discount rate is it's really factoring in kind of a, for lack of a better word and very generic term, like an inflationary factor to it all, based upon a lot of actuarial categories. Which, since I'm not an actuary, I'll be honest with you, I'm not going to get in too deeply with it and speak for them. But we've been seeing this overall happen because when you lower the discount rate, it assumes a lower rate of return, but potentially a higher cost inflation factor. And it's kind of been all over the place. I think where the numbers are now, minus what's been happening, what may comes out of the issues with COVID, is probably going to start settling down. It's under this new OPEB reporting methodology. We're a few years into it now. Things are starting to stabilize. People are finding an even flow with it, where everybody's comfortable, and that's probably where that's going. Your net pension, that's in a much better position actually. You have a net liability of only $6 million on that one, and that was slightly up 600,000. All of these also factor into the fact that I would point out that like with the pension, it's based on how many people you're employing in the school district. If that increases or decreases, that affects the future. Not so much, obviously, the pensioners that are already retired, but what you're having is current staff and how that ebbs and flows also factors in on that. And the other thing I wanted to point out is you started your OPEB trust fund a couple of years back. I believe you put in around 25,000 originally. You put in another 25,000 for 19 and some interest. So you ended the year with about 52,000 accumulated in there, which was up the 27. So you about doubled the money in that regard. Is it big numbers? No. Not when you're looking at a $36 million liability. However, I think it's good to get into the mode of addressing this and showing a plan, even if it's a slow plan. It's a plan. It's not ignoring it. A lot of the bond rating agencies and stuff right now are largely in a mode of, what's your plan to deal with all this? And obviously there's different levels. If I went back 3 years ago and you didn't have a trust fund set up at all or whatever, it would have been hard for anyone to make an argument. Oh yeah, we're thinking about this and we're handling it. Well, not so much. Now you're setting some money aside and, and you can work towards it. Once again, pension, OPEB, they're long-term liabilities. These are like, pension could be a little less because depending on where the county sets as far as when they're going to be fully funded, but your OPEB is basically based on a 30-year liability schedule. So, there's 3 decades left here to kind of catch up. And admittedly, it's a rolling schedule. It's 30 years from every time you get a new one. So, it's a work. A lot of places are considering that once they get caught up on their retirement, they'll start putting some of the retirement money over to OPEB is what a lot of people are thinking. So that's the highlights from the financial statements. It's a cursory evaluation. I know one of the things was like the E&D number. You were at 600,000. I believe you were at around 100,000 5 years before. So, to put that into context, you've maintained that $600,000 level in 18 and 19, where if you went back, earlier in the decade, you were at about 20% of that amount. So the fact that you brought it up there and are maintaining it, I think, shows a good solid sign of where the financials are at. For anyone who, let me just pull it up over here. I got the financials over here on my other screen. So, you know, your cash, you had about $2.3 million of cash available in the general fund at the end of June. So, and that includes your general fund, which is your school choice, and the other non-majors. It does not include most of your scholarships and your OPEB trust. Those are separate things. Any questions on the financials before I get into the management letter? Okay. So I'm going to jump over to the management letter. We pretty much covered most of what was in the overview just now, as far as the OPEB and the pension. There is a note in here. We were able to issue it late enough where things had started happening with COVID. And while no one knew at the time of when we were pulling the management letter together where it was all going to go, it was worth noting that, for school districts, the revolving funds can be kind of the trickier part. Like school lunch, for example, is a revolving fund. A lot of districts continued to send out meals and fund meals, and I know certain amounts of them, I believe, were still reimbursed by the state, but at lesser levels. It seemed from the numbers we're seeing early on. So that's kind of one of those aspects of, okay, do we have as many people working on school lunch? Yes or no? Are we putting out the same amount of food? So what's our inventory cost? It was kind of a moving target in general. So as you're looking at things now, the question is, where exactly is school lunch going to come out? Because you had some fixed salaries. I don't know if you were providing meals to everyone or just the free and reduced at your choice, but if you weren't providing it to everyone, well, you were missing out on the kids who were paying cash for those meals. And that's what funds some of the salaries. So, that aspect is hard to evaluate and analyze. Not so much maybe an immediate impact, but athletic revolving. You have certain sunk costs in maintaining any kind of athletic program, whether it's just the AD salary, if you charge it there, or anything else. But if you don't have, what's going to happen with sports? I mean, you didn't have any spring sports. What happens if, the football games are canceled and there's not that revenue coming in from the stands and the stadiums and stuff like that? That's a behind the scenes funding source that you can say, well, hey, we didn't put the football team on the field and we didn't collect any money, no big deal. But that doesn't mean there's no cost behind it. And that's where we kind of were finding that those revolving funds were sneaking up. I don't think so much you're going to have a problem with the federal and state grants. At the moment, none of that money seems to be, and when I mean that, I don't mean the CARES money or the money coming out of DSE directly for COVID. I mean, like your special ed money, your Title I money. Those are entitlement grants. Primarily based on like student population and needs. So you should be fine with regards to those at the moment. The Fed hasn't indicated they're looking to cut any of that, and a lot of that money you're getting is a pass through from the Fed to the state. So the state's financial woes won't necessarily hit those numbers completely. Some of your state grants maybe, but not necessarily the biggest grants that you have that we perform the single audit for. I know, school choice, you have a very healthy school choice and that money is available to be spent as you need to be. You don't have a large general stabilization fund, but in some respects, school choice is a stabilization fund for you all. The numbers I think have been pretty positive as far as you have more students coming from out of district than leaving your district to go elsewhere. So school choice for Narragansett has been a net plus. as a revenue source. So, that's another thing to keep in mind as you're trying to work your way through budgeting aspects. That's been a kind of a moneymaker for you. So I'm going to jump now into the informational items. Yeah, we talked about the OPEB. Network security. It's there as a reminder. We're still getting, there's still the fraud going on of people breaking in. In fact, I think there was a large, I can't remember which one, but there was a large city, I think this past week, that got hit with the ransomware. As if they probably needed anything else to deal with right now, being locked out of their files. But, it doesn't, it doesn't go away, and it's there. So it's something to kind of keep in mind, to make sure the resources are adequately distributed to it. I mean, one of the other aspects, and I know you have a very well-developed IT department, but you're now looking at, from a network security perspective, of educating the students at home. You're dealing with, the fact that you have a lot of other users tying into your system through the internet because they're not in a classroom. So it can tend to be a little more open that way. And while not necessarily security, the aspect is, the drain on the resources of the network. I'm sure they've talked about, hey, we need some more memory, or we need to speed this up a little bit. So all that comes into play, and I'm sure probably in some cases security levels probably impact at times speed and available resources electronically, and it could be easy to be like, well, we can get a little more out of it if we kind of let off on some of those firewall controls or things like that, potentially. So you just want to make sure you don't sacrifice too much in that regard, would be our only warning. On the plus side for you, and I'll be honest, for us, there were some new GASB pronouncements that had come out. One of the big ones that was going to kick in here for FY20 was they were redoing their fiduciary funds, and how they were going to be reported. So things that were what UMIS accounting under DESE DOR is called agency funds in the past, were kind of set aside. They were either in the other non-major, or they were under an agency fund in fiduciary. Your biggest one that is impacted by that is student activities. That used to be under an agency fund. When the GASB 84 here kicks in for this, it's probably going to be moved over to special revenue for our reporting or other non-major. And that's just basically based on the criteria that GASB is set up. Because of how it is set up across the state in the chart of accounts, we would not be suggesting that Anne Marie change her chart of accounts. This is something that we can do, easily enough in our own reporting files. But it does shift some things around from where it was in the past. Probably one of the bigger areas of where this would impact us as the audit is addressed a little later on in the management letter, that we would want to see kind of cleaned up a little bit. But anyway, the good news is that since we did the management letter, GASB came out and they took all their most current GASBs over the next year or two and they extended them a year. So this was going to have to be in place for 2020. It's now 2021. The next big one was going to be your operating leases. These are not like your capital leases that are like, basically you're paying for the entire batch of computers and it's $1 buyout kind of thing. These are probably more like your copiers, where effectively you're just renting it. In the past, operating leases were not reported on the financial statements as any kind of future obligation. Even though, say, for your copier lease, you may be obligated to pay, $2,000 or $3,000 a year for the next 5 years for that copier. What GASB kind of came out with and determined is if it acts like a duck and looks like a duck, it's probably a duck. And the fact of the matter is, whether you were buying the copier or not, you were still committing the district to a long-term obligation outside of your current budget period by signing like a 5-year copier lease. So those are all going to have to be inventoried, and the terms of their lease are going to have to be factored in and amortized effectively, just like you do a debt schedule for your long-term debt. That is pretty significant from a management perspective. I mean, that's not just the main office, that's all the school buildings and anything like that in those agreements. So that's something that someone's going to have to their inventory and provide to us as the audit. If we're pulling all that stuff together, it's kind of a management function. So it kind of crosses a line there a bit with the independence aspect of the audit. But once again, on the good news side, that was supposed to kick in 2021. So basically starting in another week, that's been pushed out another year. So you've effectively got a couple more years to kind of figure out how to go about approaching that. So that was it on GASB. There's just a little note in here on the STC lease disclosures. I know you can get assistance with your debt advisor in doing this. They provide some service, but now your capital leases, the SEC wants some disclosures on those. So it's really not just your long-term debt to build a school. When you're buying, your 100 laptops and it's a capital lease, you actually are having now to submit some paperwork to the SEC on that. That's been around about a year and a half. It obviously does impact you all because you do have some capital leases, but as I said, your debt advisor can help out your business office staff as necessary on that. Fraud prevention. We just have a note in here in general that, we're not going to get into it pretty deep. You guys have seen it, I know, a bunch of times. Just the idea is, watch for the processes and internal controls, primarily around areas of cash handling, where money is actually being touched. The other aspects of fraud could be more, anytime somebody's turning something in, payroll wise or invoices to be paid, but that goes through a more strict review process than the cash, obviously. Cash is more subject and liquid to stuff happening to it. So we just have that in there as a reminder to, keep the staff at the school district well aware of when they're handling money, what the processes are, timely turnovers of money, so that it's not laying around anywhere is all important. I'm going to go to the findings and recommendations now, which is on page 5. And there's a couple of new things in here, which, not that I'm wanting to find things, but I'm looking to give you some more meaningful feedback. And I think we have some areas that we were able to provide a fresh viewpoint on. The first one being privacy policies. And I want to up front say, this isn't inherently generated as a problem by the school district, yours. It's how your vendors are providing you invoices. Due to privacy acts, there's certain services to students where those students' names should not be listed on an invoice. Most of the service providers have, over the last 5 to 10 years, gone to assigning like a student reference number or some other code that, say, the special ed director, they know which student that code is, but it doesn't say it on the invoice. We ran across that you did have a vendor who was still providing you invoices that were listing out the students' names, and suggested that you contact the vendor and ask them to cease doing that. Ultimately, keep in mind that your records are public documents, and that's kind of wise. If something happened and somebody wanted to make a public records request, you obviously wouldn't want that in the file cabinets in the expenses. Purchase orders. We noted that a few of the purchase orders when it asked for the date, just had like 2018/2019, which wasn't really specific about when the purchase order was being actually issued or for what for. So one of the things we wanted to add, what we were trying to suggest is that, you know, the purchase order have a specific date on it. As referenced in the management letter itself, one of the more important aspects of this is the purchase order should be requested and approved before anyone goes out and buys anything. Effectively, there should never be a purchase order which is dated after the invoice date. Because effectively what that would mean is somebody went out and bought something, committed an expense, and then said, ooh, policy is I have to get a purchase order. Let me go get one now. And then I'll turn in the invoice for payment. Kind of like, you know, cart before the horse. So by using such generic dates, it kind of opened up that process, which isn't a good internal control. So the budget process itself, and this was more just as a feedback, is in looking at how the budget was prepared, there are like the E&D amount that was being applied. It wasn't necessarily on the nice sheet that kind of was showing how everything balanced. Everything did balance. I wouldn't want anyone to think that, but there was that whole full disclosure of, you know, besides the fees being charged or the assessments being charged to the participating towns, what are the other sources? And it wasn't always spelled out necessarily as clearly on the cover sheet of the budget, as I know you all were discussing it behind the scenes. So we were kind of like, you know, when you know what that stuff is, detail it on the budget proof sheet. It kind of helps us too when we're trying to prove the budget and where the money's coming from when it's detailed out. So as I said, the work was all being done. It was more of a presentation aspect. The payroll warrants. There is the law that says that no amounts are to be paid out without the payroll warrant being approved. I know with the regularity of the school committee meetings, you tend to put out more payroll warrants because they're weekly in some cases than your meeting, and and especially I'm sure over the last few months has been a little challenging. I can only tell you what I'm kind of required to tell you, which is, you know, you need to follow Mass General Law. What I will throw out there to you all is that I knew of some towns even before all of the COVID issues, and I'm sure more of them are probably going to it. They're looking into developing electronic signature processes, which would effectively say allow Anne Marie to put the warrant out there in the cloud in a restricted area where only you all have access to it, but you would have an electronic signature. So effectively you could do almost exactly what you're doing right now. You could be sitting at, you know, your computer at home, and you could go in, you could review the payroll warrant, and you could put an electronic signature to it. And nobody has to come to the school business office to do a manual signature. That's one way that could potentially be adopted that would allow for compliance and also obviously convenience to those of you who are volunteering for this. I would suggest that maybe it be considered as an option to go forward with. Obviously, a lot of stuff is going to go electronic. I don't think we're going to go completely backwards after all of this. So, you know, I think the timing is kind of right in that regard to look at something like this, and also how else it may be able to impact you. It's an electronic signature. It's not just for the warrants. It's for anything else that you all may need to sign officially. That could come into play as a convenience. So just wanted to throw that out there in regards to that. Assessment receipts. There was one assessment. It got delayed for whatever reason, and it kind of it was delayed for about 4 months before the money came in. Ultimately, the money did come in, and you got it. In talking with Anne Marie, I know that there has been an issue trying to get money out of the same location this year. I don't know if last year that we looked at was a similar situation as to why, or if, for some reason then somebody at that town wasn't passing the bill to who it needed to be approved or whatever. But obviously, cash flow is a big issue. Like we said, you had the $2 million we talked about in cash at year end. So you can absorb a certain amount of delay in the assessment, but that's not part of the deal. People are supposed to pay their assessments on time. There's no interest factor in there and stuff like that. So the assumption is compliance will be met with their agreement with the district. If it gets to be too out of hand, I would say it's probably more of a legal issue than an accounting issue as to how to enforce collection. And I'll just leave it there. But we did note that there was some significant delays in the district actually receiving money it was owed. And it was a significant amount of money. So it's just something to be aware of. Pooled cash. It's a very, I'm trying to think. The pooled cash is basically a result of how Munis is set up. If you think of all the different funds as individual companies, like school lunch is a company, it has its own cash. School choice is its own company, it has its own cash. And then think of it as the district is a consolidation of all of them. What happens is the way that your Munis accounting system is set up is all of the cash is reported in the general fund. And then the pieces of cash that belong to the other funds are handled through a positive and negative due to, due from kind of thing, if anyone's familiar with fund accounting, or pooled cash as they call it. The pooled cash was slightly out of balance. It wasn't much at all. I know Anne Marie and I have discussed it, and we're just looking to kind of get it squared away a little bit, but that should be tackled. Ethics forms. This is the that state required mandate that all employees and elected officials every 2 years do that online certification for ethics. We did an analysis. We tested 25. One of the people we looked at had not provided an ethics form. So overall, that's not. I mean, it's 1 out of 25. I tend to find that pretty often in most municipalities, kind of 1 out of 25. So you're right there in the middle of the range, but it is something that is required. So and it wasn't 25 for 25. So just wanted to bring that up. Payroll withholding accounts. I know we've all talked about this pretty extensively in the past. It is a work in process. I know there's been some turnover in personnel and stuff in this past year with people involved in that. I've had conversations with Anne Marie about, now might be a good time to look at the processes, retooling them, restructuring them, since you've got new people coming in that have to be trained anyway. Maybe finding a way. I mean, I'll let Anne Marie talk about it if she wants to. I know she was pretty close with figuring out a bunch of it over the year. I think there was still a little more. As far as where it's at as of today. But and then the one underneath it there on page 6, cash tailings. That's just the old outstanding checks. They obviously go back. They go back a few years, back as far as 2012. These are the checks that you all paid out to vendors, and they just never cashed them. There could be potentially some payroll checks in there too, but mostly it would be vendors. I know the treasurer is working on trying to track those down. There is state statutes for how you address this. It's not as easy as maybe we all would handle with our own personal bank accounts. There's processes that have to be followed. That does make it a little less than efficient. But I do know that it is being worked on. So, and then we get to the final page. So going back to what I was saying about student activities before, and the fact that it would have to be shifted to a different fund. Munis, there's a programming glitch in Munis, is what I'm going to call it, where the revenue, let me make sure I get this right. I believe the revenue is being posted as revenue, but the expenses are being charged to the liability account. So what's happening is your cash is fine, but your assets and liabilities are out of shift because you're putting things through liabilities and not allowing them to close to fund balance the way its counterpart is. So, the kids bring in $100 for something, they want to pay $100 out. What's kind of happening with the way things are programmed is that $100 is going off to, this side of the pool. And then the other $100 when it comes out is coming out of the other side of the pool, and it's not netting out properly. And so that's more of a programming thing than I would say an issue that I have with accounting or how it's done. But once we move over to that new reporting for GASB, we are going to have revenues and expenses that we can rely on and report in a different way than we've had to in the past, which this impacts. Turnover forms, my understanding is that, there's been some small tweaks, but overall, I think the district's pretty happy with finally where they've got them. A lot of it is just getting people to fill it out properly. Like one of the issues we will have is we're in at the end of the year and we're looking for cutoff tests. So like, for example, what money do you receive in the first week or two of July that actually relates to maybe money that person had collected in June, or that the services that money had collected on had been rendered in June? What's happened at times over the years is people are just writing whatever date they're handing the money over to the treasurer on the turnover form and not saying very clearly, I know you rent some of the space, for example, in the school. So you're getting a check the first or second week of July, but in the description on the turnover form, it's not saying if it's June's rent or July's rent. So it's kind of like, okay, is this supposed to be accrued? Isn't it? Like, what does it relate to? So I know, I know that with the dating of it and the clarity of the information on it, it was probably, I think, the more challenging aspect that we're looking at now than say the format of the turnover form itself. One of the things we've been pushing really hard in our other communities with regards to turnover forms is, back in the day, it was a 3-part form with carbon copies, and people used to just handwrite on there, I'll pick on, let me pick on the school lunch, because I know they have electronic systems now. They might have just put on the turnover form, collections for, June 24th, and then a number. And that was it. That was all that was provided. And everybody's just like, oh, that's school lunch receipts for the 24th, without having a lot of backup. When people were allowed to handwrite things like that, that's where ultimately, when you found, if you go back and you look at where fraud in municipalities happened, a lot of times people could just write on those forms whatever they wanted to. And there wasn't a whole lot of backup. So the treasurer and the accountants were kind of forced to be like, well, they said they gave me $100. I got $100. Everything looks fine. Nowadays, though, almost any aspect of municipal processing that's touching cash has a computer system that's supporting it. Student activities has QuickBooks supporting it. School lunch has an electronic system that's tracking all of your students by customers and how much money's coming in and they're prepaying and things like that. Potentially, even some of the athletic stuff might be starting, if there's a basketball game, somebody might be sitting there with a cash register if they're paying as they come through the door. It might not work that way at the football games, but, and the cash register would have a register tape. What we're saying is if you really want to tighten up that internal control, when people when school lunch brings the money that they're turning over, ask them for a report out of the electronic system and have them staple it to that turnover. Because now it's not, if someone wanted to take money, now they would have to be able to tamper with the electronic system. They would have to be able to go in and change it. And a lot of people, because of controls, wouldn't have that ability to do it. And even if they did have the ability to do it, the controls a lot of times will record when people are overriding the controls and who that user was. So even if it doesn't prevent it, any kind of fraud, if fraud did happen and you had to go back and have somebody come in and research it and figure it out and investigate it, it would kind of show you the path of what happened by going in and looking at it. So that's another thing that we're really pushing, as I said, to that, because you've invested in all these electronic systems. And a lot of times people are like, oh, that's great. That's helping that office. But a lot of times those systems have the ability to actually be a part of your internal controls financially, and they can be brought in. So that's something to maybe consider having them do. And then I know the last one is, I know one we've talked about is developing a consistent payroll period, having everybody paid biweekly instead of some people biweekly and some people weekly. It obviously it's a time saver. It's half the number of payroll warrants that have to be run and generated. It's half the number of data entry, so to speak, that has to be done by the payroll clerks. And conversely, it's half the number of opportunities where just human error of entering payroll numbers could happen. If it's only happening once every 2 weeks instead of twice every 2 weeks. So sorry if that took a while, but I kind of wanted to go over it thoroughly with you all and while I had the opportunity. Any questions or comments or anything?
I just want to say thank you for a very comprehensive review, and also throw out a big thank you to Anne Marie and her staff as well, because I know that you work hand in hand with them. And it's a nice reflection upon the quality of work that the office does, from what you've reported on. At our last meeting, we did ask for our academic administrative subcommittee to just kind of go over the management report. So I know that there was some updates on some of the items already, which we can go into maybe a little bit later, because I know we've actually, I think, resolved several of them. Anne Marie has a good status update on several of them, as you've already mentioned. Are there any questions from the committee? Okay, I don't see any. I just wanted to make one overall observation. I know that, by law, we're required to send this audit report out to our member towns. I think it might be in our best interest as a school committee to put a cover letter on this report, reiterating, I think, these two specific areas that you highlighted in your management report, which is very little in our general stabilization fund and our OPEB trust fund. Under the funding constraints, and I know it's going to be very difficult this upcoming year and maybe for the several following years, that we're going to have to really tighten the belt, but we haven't been able to focus on funding those accounts as much as they should be, or have as much of a focus from our town partners on making that happen, since we're not a revenue generating operation, we're reliant on the assessments and our state receipts. So I'm thinking that it might be a good idea for the committee to put some sort of cover letter on to the towns and just ask them that they keep that in the back of their mind as we begin to prepare budgets, and understand that this is, been noted by the auditing report that this is something we should focus on as well. So I don't know if Dr. Casavant, if you wanted to draft something maybe as we send this report, I guess the official report, and out to our member towns.
Sure, absolutely.
One of the things you kind of touched on it a little bit, I wanted to, and I know Chris and Anne Marie are they're pretty connected out in the world and pay attention to what's going on with it. But one of the things that seems to have maybe been as clearly communicated throughout this COVID situation when it comes to regional school districts is what DSE got for money is what they're calling ESSER grants. And that amount of money is going to be distributed based on Title I counts. Overall, it's not a lot of money that the DSE got. It's not quite like the ARA money from 10 years ago where they got a significantly bigger pile and were able to distribute it directly. So where most of the CARES money is coming into is it's coming in to the towns. And what the state has said is they've assumed a model of towns are responsible for their school districts, whether or not they're regional or a department of the town. And a lot of the reasoning behind that was the CARES money, this initial round of stuff has been allocated largely by population base. Like when they talk about the census and all this stuff that you hear the ads for. So it was going to be very hard for the state to kind of figure out, well, okay, how much money do we give the town versus the regional school district if it's based on population, because like you guys service multiple towns. So that all the money went to the towns with the assumption being that they are supposed to share it with their regional school district, because you're not getting any of that money directly. And I'm assuming at this point that's kind of become more pronounced. But I know the first couple of months, it was kind of like the schools were all, especially the regional schools, were all kind of waiting for, oh, when we're going to get ours. And it was, you've got to go work it out with your towns, which, does, a lot of regional school districts right now are kind of are butting heads with their towns over budgeting issues and stuff like that. So it does kind of put a weird speed bump in that process of sometimes that communication line isn't the greatest right now. But there has to be a way to figure it out and make it work. And that's basically what DSE and DOR both said, and ANF is make it work. But I did want to kind of point that out because I know I have a bunch of school districts right now that are out buying laptops with their money, getting ready for the next school year, and they're doing their orders now. And this town said to them, well, what do you how much you want? What do you want? And they're like, you know what? We need like $300,000 of computers. And they're like, fine, give us the invoices and whatever. Obviously, you got to work it out. But I did want to kind of point that out. It has not been a very smooth informational and communication process. I think Chris might agree with me on that, as far as like how districts are supposed to fit into this model.
Yeah.
And so I did want to throw that out there.
I would say though, that to both Templeton and Phillipson's defense, I guess, that they did reach out, and we did apply the costs that were applicable. We submitted that back and actually broke it down by the 8515 or whatever it was.
The FEMA and the CARE, yeah.
We did all of that. So
Yep.
They reached out and we identified what we could. Again, there was rules to it. You just couldn't, just ask for the moon. But they did reach out, and we'll see what happens. We're not sure what the end result is. Obviously, we don't,
Okay.
but we
I
did
can
work.
tell you the application date, Chris, for the state for if they wanted money in 2020 was a week ago last Friday. So the money did start coming from the state last week to the towns. So if you were part of that, if they submitted it after a week ago, Friday, I believe they have to wait till 2021 to get their money. So, but no, and as I wasn't really sure where it was at. I talked to one school district or one town last week, not you guys, not any of them involved with you guys. And I said, so yeah, how's that working with your school district? And they're like, the town wasn't even aware they were supposed to be sharing it. And they said that they'd had zero communication as of 7 days ago with the school district on how that district was going to get any of the CARES money. So, and I'd heard of a similar town a week or so before that. So I just wanted to throw that out there just to let you guys know that if it has been challenging or a little awkward, it's not you. It was just kind of how that process was developed.
Thank you. Anybody have any other questions? Anne Marie, did you want to offer any comments at this point?
Well, I know in academic sub, we had talked about the different things, and I think at the next academic sub is when we're gonna go over all of the things that have happened pertaining to the management letter in detail. So there'll probably be a better update by you guys after your next academic sub meeting. So.
Perfect. Okay, if there are no other questions for Mr. Clark, we can close out of our audit report. I want to thank you once again for joining us and sharing the information that was found. And we appreciate, as I said, the level of thoroughness that you always seem to put into the reports. It's much appreciated. So thank you. You're more than welcome, obviously, to hang out with us, but if you have other things to do, we won't hold it against you if you drop off. We get it.
Okay, yeah, and I'm actually gonna go back to work, if that's okay, so.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Have a good night.
You too. Okay. So next up on our list is I'm going to go to our student representatives. We have our two students. Unfortunately, James Hool couldn't attend tonight. He worked and then had a family commitment he had to do, but I do see that Emma Hughes is here. Officially, she and James are both graduated, so I guess they're not officially student reps anymore, but they did ask for one more opportunity to just come in and kind of wrap up their senior year and report on things and give us a status. So I will turn the floor over to Emma Hughes.
Hi, everyone. So the senior class graduated this past weekend, so that was wild. There was a nice ceremony where the families arrived in like leveled times. So everyone was able to walk across the stage in a giant line. So everyone got that experience. And then there'll be a video coming out, I don't know when, with all the graduation festivities combined. The school year is officially like over now. That's crazy. It doesn't really feel like it because we weren't in school to begin with, but yeah, so everything's done now. And now summer, and yeah, I'm out.
Well, I would just like to say one more time on behalf of the committee, thank you to you and James for sitting with us at the table this year. You certainly have provided wonderful guidance and thoughtful insight to the committee as we've gone through and had decisions to make, especially in this past year between budget and academics and all sorts of things. So it's been truly appreciated by myself, and I believe I can speak on behalf of the committee. I know you had a nice gift that was presented to you by Dr. Casavant when you came to pick up your caps and gowns. So, you know, it was from the heart, I think, from all of us to say thank you and wish you both well as you head on off into your next stage in life. So thank you.
Thank you, Emma.
Thank you, Emma.
Okay, so we're just going to back up for just a second. We needed to do some housekeeping, which will be the approval of the meeting minutes of May 20th. They are out. They've been out on the agenda, so hopefully everybody had a chance to review them. And if someone would like to, I would entertain a motion to approve the meeting minutes of May 20th of 2020 as written.
So moved.
I have a motion by Mr. Marks. Do I have a second?
Second.
And I have a second by Mr. Mason. Does anyone have any questions or comments on the minutes as they were presented? Seeing none, we will do a roll call vote. So if the school committee can unmute themselves. Mrs. Mattson,
Yes.
Mrs. Chartier,
Yes.
Mrs. Trifilo,
Yes.
Mr. Mason,
Aye.
Mr. Marks,
Aye.
and Mrs. Hughes says yes. So that was unanimous. The meeting minutes of May 20th, 2020 have been approved. Next up was our bills and payroll. And I would take a motion to recommend to accept the bills and payroll warrants as presented.
So moved.
I have a motion by Mr. Marks. Do I have a second?
Second.
And I have a second by Mrs. Chartier. Any questions or comments on the bills and payroll warrants? Seeing none, we'll do roll call. Mrs. Mattson? Mrs. Chartier?
Yes.
Mrs. Trifilo?
Yes.
Mr. Mason?
Aye.
Mr. Marks?
Aye.
And Mrs. Hughes says yes, so that was unanimous. Next up, we have public input. I will just check in once more with Mrs. Varney. Last I knew, we did not have any written statements that had been forwarded to her attention to be read, and I see her saying that no, we have not received anything since I last checked. I'm also looking up at the chat for the school committee meeting on live stream. I know there is a little bit of a delay. So we'll give a few seconds to see if any questions or comments come in there. And we'll go from there. And if there are, we can come back and answer those questions. While we wait to see if there's anything that comes up, I am going to go to the NDEA. So I see Mrs. Parker is here, and we'll have them do their report, and then we'll double check on that chat stream. So Mrs. Parker.
Hello, everybody. Not much to report, just that the end of the year did not happen the way we all wanted it to happen, obviously, but kids got through the year, teachers got through the year, and now we're just coming up with our options to what might happen in the fall, what it might look like, and waiting for the state to make decisions so we can move forward and start planning accordingly. But people are prepared either way to do what they have to do so we can teach our kids.
Well, I again want to just extend our thanks to yourself and all of the teachers and the staff that have made the end of the year what it was. Certainly not what we wanted, as you said, but we appreciate all the hard work that has gone into, you know, as I like to say, we left March 13th and found out that we weren't coming back. So that was a big shift, and it's appreciated how quickly and easily everyone was able to make the shift and retool as they needed throughout the process. So please extend our thanks to everyone.
Thank you.
All right. I'm just going to do a check now on the chat, and I do not see any other comments from the public for public input. TCTV, I'm gonna break because I was gonna do this under school committee comments, but I'm gonna do it here because they did put a note on our chat. TCTV has been absolutely wonderful helping our seniors with their graduation, and they are the ones who are putting together the graduation video. There's a message there that says the graduation video should be ready within a week. So I just wanted to put that out there. And I also wanted to give a big shout out to the TCTV staff, which is Steve Castle, Sean Lampert, and Hannah Bennett. They have been fabulous through this whole thing and getting footage for our kids. So I want to say thank you. And I'll do it again when it comes to comments as well, so we can thank them twice. So with that, I'm going to move on to our business manager's report. Mrs. Geister had put all the reports out there, and I will turn it over to Mrs. Geister for an update on what we have in front of us.
All right, the first thing, we'll just talk about the revenue real quick. I included that this month just so you could see where we're at. You can see if you took a look at this report that Medicaid is going to come up short. We estimated higher when we put our budget together last year for FY20 than we were actually able to pull off. And the biggest reason is we lost quite a few kids. One of the big ones is we had a residential placement that was $160,000 tuition. Although we didn't have to pay it, which is a good thing, it also reflects on our Medicare that we didn't get to claim it either. So that's one of the big things. I also want to bring to your attention that our town assessments are up to date. We're just waiting for the final payment for June from both towns, which is right on time. So we're good as far as the revenue. It's just that it's going to be short about 136,000. So to make up for that, we have to make sure we have at least 136,000 in our expense side that we don't spend, so we can come out even. Grants, there's really nothing going on with them. Most of them that are federal grants just roll over into next year because DESI automatically did that for all of the districts who had money remaining as of like May 1st. So that was a huge help to us, not to have to worry about spending it or losing it or anything. So those are all in really good shape. And just on the general fund budget, I just wanted to point out if anyone actually looked at it, I did it a little bit differently. Usually I end it on the end of the month prior to the meeting that we're on, but I wanted to get you as close to where we really are as possible. So this was as of the beginning of June 9th. It's actually, I just looked at it this afternoon after we finished our final payrolls, and actually it looks a little bit prettier than on June 9th. So it's definitely headed in the right direction, but we still have quite a bit outstanding that will finish up in the next couple of weeks. So I don't know if anyone has any questions for me.
Are there any questions for Ms. Geister? Thank you for putting together the report on the receipts. That's very helpful. I know we focus so much on the expense side, but when we do have such a shortfall, it's obviously a struggle then on the expense side to offset that. So that's very good to be kept up to date on. So thank you for putting that together. And I know we're going to talk about transfers. I think we have 2 more items, so we'll hit those. But no other questions? Okay. I have one question, but it's actually going to be covered in our next agenda item, which was where are we with the bus? I see that we have come to a conclusion with the various working groups, I believe that at the state level that they came up with the various vendors. So if Mrs. Geister, if you wanted to discuss what that was and this amendment, we can vote on to have that signed.
So the higher ups in the state, some other business managers besides myself, they negotiated with First Student, and they did it as First Student as a whole across Massachusetts. And the conclusion that resulted from it was that districts who were contracted with them would pay 30% of their contracted price, which for us, I think that's fair. You know, during our whole meal transportation, I would call down to Gardner, like they would send a bus, they would change it when we were gonna do the parade. Everybody was on board. I have no complaints, so that's why I feel 30% is very fair. That number for us, 30% of our monthly contract for the period during COVID is $71,000 that we had to pay. And of that amount, we had made the decision to pay them for the transporting of the meals anyways, and that was $30,000. So the balance that we actually had to pay for buses we didn't use was $40,000, which is pretty good. So of that $40,000, that will count towards our reimbursement. Even though it didn't transport kids, it was still paid in good faith for transportation. And the portion of the 30% that we had already paid towards meal transport will be charged to the cafeteria expenses, which you can see in the general fund budget because they ran out of money. That does not count towards reimbursement.
Does anyone have any questions or comments on the bus contract before we go ahead and make a motion to approve it? Okay, seeing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the amendment to the First Student bus contract for fiscal year 2020.
So moved.
I have a motion by Mrs. Mattson. Do I have a second?
Second.
And I have a second by Mrs. Chartier. And once again, are there any questions, comments, or concerns? Okay, seeing none, we will vote on the motion to approve the amendment to the First Student bus contract for fiscal year 2020. Mrs. Mattson,
Yes.
Mrs. Chartier,
Yes.
Mrs. Trifilo,
Yes.
Mr. Mason,
Aye.
Mr. Marks,
Yes.
and Mrs. Hughes says yes. So we have now approved that amendment, and I know payment is in process, so that has been taken care of. The next item is technology leases. As always, we are on a replenish cycle with our technology. Part of, I believe, some of the things that our auditor was talking about with reporting to the SEC also, I think, has to do with us approving these leases where years ago that didn't need to be formally approved at the school committee level. There are 2 leases that were attached to the agenda that I hope everyone was able to review. One was for, I believe they were MacBooks through Apple. And the second was a contract with Dell for, I think about 500 and maybe 25 Chromebooks that were on the replacement cycle. So I would, if there's, I'll entertain a motion, then we can do questions or comments after. I would entertain a motion to approve both technology leases for Apple and Dell as presented.
So moved.
And I have a motion by Mr. Marks and a second by Mr. Mason. Does anyone have any questions or comments on those? Yes, Mrs. Mattson.
So do we need to send these old ones back, or what happens to the old ones?
Depending on the computer. A lot of the Chromebooks are what they call past their life. They won't take them back. We have to dispose of them properly, etc. Others, they'll refurbish, mostly the Apple, not so much the Chromebooks. So I couldn't tell you I couldn't tell you of them which were past, life and which were not. But in general, the Chromebooks are disposed of, and if it's fiscally sound, we refurbish any of the Apple.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, we'll vote on the motion to approve both technology leases for Apple and Dell as they were presented. I will do a roll call vote. Mrs. Mattson?
Yes.
Mrs. Chartier?
Yes.
Mrs. Trifilo?
Yes.
Mr. Mason?
Aye.
Mr. Marks?
Yes.
And Mrs. Hughes says yes, so we have unanimous approval on those 2 leases. The next item on the list is our fiscal year 20 budget transfer requests. So we cannot end the year in the red in any of our major line items. Attached to the agenda, Mrs. Geister had a very detailed line item of what accounts needed money put into them and what accounts we could transfer money from. I will ask if there's any questions or comments before we motion to make that happen. I don't see any, so I would entertain a motion to authorize the business manager to make transfers necessary within line items as presented to close the fiscal year 2020 budget.
So moved.
I have a motion. Was that you, Mr. Marks? I wasn't looking at the screen. Okay, if Mr. Marks makes a motion, do I have a second?
Second.
And I have a second by Mr. Mason. Are there any questions or comments on any of those line item transfers? Seeing none, we'll do a roll call vote. Mrs. Mattson?
Yes.
Mrs. Chartier?
Yes.
Mrs. Trifilo?
Yes.
Mr. Mason?
Aye.
Mr. Marks?
Yes.
And Mrs. Hughes says yes, so we have unanimously approved those budget transfers. And thank you, Mrs. Geister, for putting a very detailed sheet together with some very good explanations of why we needed to move monies around. Thank you.
Welcome.
All right, next up on the agenda is the Bullying Intervention and Prevention Plan. This was introduced by Dr. Kazimant last month. We were all asked to take a look at it and let him know if there were any questions or comments. And we were told we would be doing a vote this month on the plan. Dr. Kazimant, you have anything additionally to add since last month? You're on mute.
I was trying to pull the document up at the same time. No, there's nothing more to add than we've already discussed. It's part of the process. Every 2 years, you have to review the plan. Former committee, Kate did a nice job with helping that process out. So it's really just a matter of, obviously getting your feedback, but approving it so we can put it into play for next year.
Great. So on that note, I would entertain a motion to approve the bullying intervention and prevention plan.
So moved.
I have a motion by Mrs. Trifilo. Do I have a second?
Second.
And I have a second by Mr. Marks. Any questions or comments on the bullying and bullying intervention and prevention plan? Yep, Mrs. Mattson.
So I just have a question. I'm assuming it's either already fixed or it will be fixed. On page 3, the coordinator is listed as Colby Young, who is listed as the assistant principal. And we either need to change his title or find a new coordinator. I would assume.
Yes, I believe that would have, it should have just said the assistant, high school assistant principal, but we'll take a look at that, Kate. Yep.
And you're muted too, Kate, just in case you were saying anything.
I said, I'll do that right now. That's fine. Good catch.
Okay. And
So
I meant to look through that and I completely forgot. So I only got through about 5 pages, but if you want me to proofread it, I can.
Any and all help before we put it out to the community would be great. Thank you.
Okay, sorry about that.
Great. Okay, so we have a motion and a second on the floor to approve the bullying intervention and prevention plan. Are there any other comments? And that would include any typos or fixing. No changes to the substance of the plan, obviously, will happen, but the content will stay the same. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, we'll do a roll call. Mrs. Mattson,
Yes.
Mrs. Chartier,
Yes.
Mrs. Trifilo,
Yes.
Mr. Mason,
Aye.
Mr. Marks,
Yes.
and Mrs. Hughes says yes, so that was unanimously approved. And thank you, Kate, for all your hard work coordinating that, and please let the committee know we appreciate their work in putting that document together and making sure that it reflects all of the steps of our plan and the substance of what we're trying to accomplish, especially as it aligns with our strategic plan. So thank you. Okay, next up, our town meeting and town election updates. So the town of Templeton had their town meeting last Wednesday. And Dr. Casavant, I'm assuming, were you able to attend? It's funny, I never asked you if you were physically there.
It was Emery and I were physically at the meeting, and it went very smooth. As a matter of fact, I thought, I did send a message over. I thought that the folks who put that together did an excellent job, given the circumstance, quite frankly. But yes, Anne-Marie and I were there to answer any questions, but there were none. So.
Okay, great. So I know that our assessment number was approved by the town of
Yes,
Templeton.
it was. Yes, it
Yeah.
was.
The town of Phillipston's town meeting has been moved to Monday night, June 29th at 7 p.m. at the PMES gym. So we don't know about the Phillipston vote yet. So I know, I believe you have plans, and I'm sure Mrs. Geister, as a resident of Phillipston, you'll be there anyway, that will attend. And I just wanted to ask, because I hadn't thought of it, we'll have handouts for the meeting? Some sort of handout, because I know.
Yes, we have the handouts that we had prepared and put on the table at the Templeton.
Perfect.
It was just the income sheet that we have been using right along, and on the backside, I put together an operating budget, just showed grants, revolving, everything else that makes up what we really spend, and then how it got down to our bottom line number.
Perfect. And I think that's what they were really, and maybe it was 2 years ago that they had, maybe there weren't enough copies or something. So that's great. So I guess we'll see you on Monday at the meeting in Phillipston, and we'll see how that fares. I know that we have submitted our 1/12 paperwork to the Department of Ed. I was in a meeting with them on Tuesday where Jay Sullivan and Christine Lynch and Michelle Griffin were there. It was a Mars meeting that they had them speak. So as soon as we find out on Monday, they would be very appreciative Tuesday morning to know whether or not we need a 1/12 number. He was already thanking certain districts who had already said they didn't need them. So I know that they are struggling through 80, I think he said he had 81 requests, which is a lot of 1/12 budgets for them to do. So we'll see what happens on Monday night. The last piece is the election results. My seat was up in Phillipston, which I did obviously win that seat since I'm here this evening. Mr. Mason won his seat again, so congratulations, Mr. Mason. And we had a seat where we had nobody to take out papers for. The process would be to look at the write-ins and offer the position to a write-in candidate. And the person who got the most votes written in was our own Deb Robichaud, and we have reached out to her, and she has agreed to come back on board. We hopefully can keep her here with us the whole time, but we'll take whatever we can get. So that's good news for the committee. She couldn't be here tonight, but it's wonderful news that we'll have Deb continuing on the committee and offering her insights to so many different things. She was a big help. So I'm very excited about that. So that was the good news. Anyone have any other comments or questions on town meetings or elections? Okay. Next up, let's see. School choice update. We have, just as a bit of history, we've already approved for 4 school choice seats in our kindergarten class. We had asked Dr. Casavant to bring us back with some updated information. I believe he's got some good data, and then we can decide if there's anything we want to do differently or move forward with, because we do need to potentially hold a school choice lottery based upon what we decide to do this evening. So Dr. Casavant.
Thank you, Chair. So last year, as of October 1, because that's the number that we use, we had a district total of 113 kindergartners, okay? Which I think dwindled down to 110 by December, but that's the number that we use. So as of today, as a matter of fact, as of 12 noon, we had 53 registered kindergartners with 31 more students in the census that have yet to register. Now, I don't want to, jump the gun here with something that's going to come up with a survey, but one of the questions on our distance learning survey was very simply, if school was open, would you send your child? And would you take the bus? Those type of things. Without really knowing, quite frankly, why 31 have yet to sign up. One could surmise that they may be waiting to see what's the configuration, how will it look, or whatever. So as of right now, we have 53 registered. We have 31 who have yet to do that, which is typical. We've talked about this a lot. Kindergarten, sometimes they'll just show up at the very end. So if you use 81, right, as the number, if they all come aboard, again, you take into account move-ins, etc., potentially, we're still short or below what we educated this year. So do we have, is there space? Yes. I want to remind folks just, again, that with the new district configuration, that with the 4 teachers, you're looking at a average class size. And again, we projected kindergarten at 114. So we just used that December number, but we had the class size at 29 with that many kindergartners with only 4 teachers. Okay, because remember, we collapsed 5 kindergartens and first, second, and third and fourth grades into 4. So right now we're below the projection. So we have, again, we're well below it. I don't know what that means given what people's concerns might be with sending their children back to school with COVID potentially being a a major player. So I think that the committee, it's, you have a decision. You have, I believe, Susan, we have 6. We have 6 students who fit the criteria of were in pre-K, have an older sibling in the district. And that's what we had decided that we were going to do, given that that's generally been the path throughout the years. Is that's how folks have come into the district, and we felt it was fair for this year. So that's where it's at.
On that. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Susan.
The numbers have changed slightly. We actually have a total of 11 applicants for kindergarten, but there's 7 sibling applicants.
Sorry, that was off by.
That just changed, so.
Yeah.
So the question we have then is, we've already approved the opening of 4 seats in kindergarten. First preference would go to siblings, so we would need to do a sibling lottery, I guess, to choose 4 out of these 7 siblings who would get the seats, unless the committee so chose to do something else. And I guess first I'd like to hear your recommendation, Dr. Casavant, because I know we're very sensitive to the siblings, especially if they've come through our pre-K program.
Yeah.
What would you recommend, how we look at this so we can make a decision that's in the best interest of all of our students as well as our towns?
Well, I think that given this, it's a very unique situation. I'm not speaking to the COVID. I'm actually speaking that we had 7 siblings come up through our pre-K. And what we talked about was that given the fact that we had closed school choice, and certainly at the elementary level, that it did leave those families in a lurch. And we felt that the 4, if there were 4 at the time, we talked about 4, and we thought that was just the 4, but it has increased to 7. I would think that my recommendation would be that, I'm going to go in a little bit about what we've been dealing with school choice here in a second, but I would say that my recommendation would be for this year, is to take the 7. But quite frankly, moving forward, if folks are putting siblings into pre-K now, like for this upcoming year, which right now every single one of our slots are already filled in pre-K. We have 76 registered pre-K students, which in essence take up 86 slots, which is where that is what we can do. So, my recommendation in order to be fair is that, is to take the 7, but certainly make it known that that is not the case every year. So if folks believe, for example, that if they do that now, if they bring their kids in now for that reason, that's not the case. Because we generally have well over 100 kids, and we may very well have over 100 kids. But right now, this is June, and we do have, or it's almost July, and we generally have a larger number already signed up for that by this point. So I think there's space. I would say that the 3 extra kids at this point will not impact class sizes one way or another. But if we were sitting over 100, I would have said absolutely not. But seeing at that right now, we're at 80. Well, potentially, around 83, 84 kids. I think that it would only be fair, but let it be known that this is not the, the path to school choice.
So with that information at hand, I will put it out to the committee. If anyone feels that they'd like to rethink our 4 seats and either increase it or do something, I would entertain a motion. If I don't hear anything, then we'll move on, but I'll give people a minute if they'd like to do something.
I move we up it to 7.
So I have a motion on the floor from Mr. Mason that would increase the number of kindergarten, this is just kindergarten, to 7 slots. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
And I have a second from Mr. Marks. Questions or comments, concerns from the rest of the committee and Mrs. Mattson?
Yeah, so if we don't take the 7, is there a potential of cutting a kindergarten teacher, or would we still keep the 4?
You're on mute, Dr. Casavan, but I think what I read your lips to say is we couldn't cut a teacher.
We have to, right, well, we're potentially over 80, so that'd be, well, we're over 80 if all sign up, and we have to, they're part of the census, so we know that they're here, we know that they live in town, that you're well over 20 kids in the pre-K. So by dividing 80, divided by 3, would put us well over, that just would not be feasible.
All right, so what if somehow, say you have 50 something that are already signed up?
Yep.
And say 15 of those other 30 kids go to another school choice out somewhere else.
Mhm.
Would you then consider cutting a teacher?
I suppose if using that math, if we dropped, 15 or 16 kids or they just didn't show up for whatever reason, we were at 53 kids total in kindergarten, we would absolutely have to, we would have to consider that. I don't know if that's going to happen. I'm certainly not going to do it until I know, until I'm sure. That's not going to happen prior.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? Mrs. Trufalo.
Yes, there's a lot of building new houses, new homes in Templeton. I'm going to think of 8 on the roads that I pass that are new. I don't know how many children would be in there and if they have registered, but building is good for the town. However, I become very hesitant to increase class numbers of students and grades, not knowing what this new building will do and not knowing what those unregistered students will do. But it's good that there's building in Templeton. It does impact the school, so it concerns me.
And I want to be clear, I misspoke. I didn't know about not all of the 7 that we're talking about went through our pre-K. I believe 5 went through our pre-K and 2, they all have siblings. So let me be clear about that. I believe it's 5 who have went through our pre-K. So I misread my note.
And based on our policy, it doesn't matter if they went through our pre-K because we have to do the lottery. So
That's
there's
right.
no way-
So my point is, when we were discussing this last, maybe a month ago or 2 months ago, that was the impetus of the conversation. It was the reason why we were talking, it's reasons why parents were talking to us about that. That was their reasoning. If I remember correctly, I believe the committee was talking about adding just 1 per class, meaning at that point there was 4. And if there was more, we'd go with the lottery. I'm simply saying that if the committee certainly decided on going with the lottery, I'm a teacher at heart and always will be. I know how hard it is, to keep your families all in one spot when you're trying to, go back to school. I was, certainly looking at the numbers, but certainly understand and would respect if we were just to go with the 4, and do the lottery.
I did the quick math. If the 53 that's registered plus the 31 with the census, and if we took 7, it averages out to 23 kids in a classroom, just in case anyone wanted to know what that average was. If we only take the 4, which we've already agreed to, a couple of those classrooms go down to 22, and 1 I think stays at 23 is the way it would work out.
Yep.
Just for information.
Yes.
Trufalo, I saw your hand was up again.
Thank you. Do we have another month that we could hold this on?
Can hold it, sure. I mean,
See what,
you-
and see
you-
what comes in?
you could,
Because-
I mean.
Yeah.
We can't because our policy says July
Oh,
1, we're going
July.
to do the first lottery.
Sorry.
So,
Yes.
but what that also means is we could do the lottery for the
Do
4,
four.
and then we could make a decision further down the road if we wanted to open more slots up. So that is a potential that we could do that. So,
Yeah, that would probably be the safest way to go.
any other questions or comments before we do vote on the motion that is on the floor? Okay, seeing none, we will do a vote on the motion on the floor, which was to increase the number of spots to 7 in kindergarten for the fiscal year 2021, which is this coming fall. So we'll do a roll call. Let me get my sheet out so I don't miss anyone. Mrs. Mattson?
I don't know.
Okay, I'll come back to you. We could do that. Mrs. Chartier?
No,
Mrs. Trifilo?
No,
Mr. Mason?
Yes.
Mr. Marks?
Yes.
Mrs. Mattson?
No.
And Mrs. Hughes says yes, which means we actually have a tie. And I'm going to look to Mr. Mason as our parliamentarian when we have a tie like this. How do we resolve this issue? Because I'm not remembering off the top of my head.
I think well, if you don't get a positive vote, it doesn't pass.
It doesn't pass. That's kind of what I thought. I wanted to confirm.
Tie is a no, right? A tie is a lot, yeah.
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 So it doesn't pass. And so what that will mean is we have 4 approved positions for kindergarten, and we will do a lottery. I believe the date of the lottery has to be by July 1st. So after this evening, obviously, Mrs. Varney with Dr. Casavant can go ahead and put our 7 names in a hopper and draw 4. We as a committee, based on the conversation I've heard, will be sure to keep this on the agenda monthly for review, so that if situation changes, we get better ideas on numbers, we could alter that if need be. So I will make sure that happens so we can continue to address this moving forward. So
Madam Chair, I want to talk a little bit about school choice just for a second. We've probably on a weekly basis, quite frankly, we receive some type of communication in regards to folks asking if they move or if they have moved, can they keep their child here? And there's usually very different variations as to the requests and the reasons why. We have stayed consistent, and we've stayed with the FAQ and what the state has put forth. I will say that I will get an exact number for the committee, because it's just been it has been hard to kind of put it all together. But I would say that probably at this point we've lost, but there have been 20 students whom would have been, have asked to stay, but we've said that they have to go to their new home district. I say this because that ratio of school choice in and school choice out, which was a very big topic of conversation. I think that will be impacted this year. Now, we won't know until we know. What we know is we haven't taken any school choice kids at all. So we know that we have not added by any stretch. So it'll be interesting to see what the differential is next year, moving forward when we get to October, November, when we start getting those preliminary reports from the state, and what that does to the bottom line. And I think that ultimately will be part of the conversation next year. But we've received, or at least I've received an email the last 5 days on 5 separate families, with multiple children. So that's why I don't have an exact number, because I would have to double check it. But it's been it's been very busy in that area.
As we're going to leave the school choice on the agenda, I think it would be helpful for you to keep us up to date, obviously, as you've said, because if we do want to consider opening school choice up once we do have better numbers, we can certainly look at that again. And I think it'll be interesting to see what happens throughout the year, especially based upon guidance of what this upcoming school year will look like. So we'll just keep this as an ongoing topic. So thank you for the update on that.
You bet.
Any other questions or comments regarding school choice? Lori?
Yeah, so just going off of what Dr. Cassavant just said, that has to do with the state law as far as how that's mandated, correct?
In the past, yes. In the past, what we would do is school choice in place. So someone would move from Templeton, let's say, or Phillipston, and they'd move to wherever. They would say to us, we would like to keep our students, our children in the district. We would say, fine, that'd be great, because they already had a seat. And really it was a very simple, and I say transaction, but literally we just had to fill up the paperwork. The statute changed in that regard. Plus, we are full at the elementary, right? 1 through, we all know, we've talked about this at length, and the middle school, quite frankly. So it'll be interesting to see how those numbers are affected, quite frankly. I'm very interested to see ultimately, when we do get that preliminary report in December, what this will do.
That answer your question? Good.
Well, yeah, so I guess, I don't know if I really have a question or not, but so I guess what he's saying is that these 20 or so people that moved out of district, I guess I'm a little confused. Are they calling to find out if they can come back? And if so, I know that it's a mandated law that they cannot. So I guess I'm a little confused as to what is it that we're facing.
Well, what happens is they have a change of address. They know that they're going to have to give us their updated information. So many people have different questions about what it's not as simple as moving, right? If there's a joint custody situation, they can come here. If there's a homeless situation, they could stay here through McKinney-Vento. So lots of people have a lot of different questions. So they know that they're going to change their address. Clearly the information is out there saying, like, look, it's just not as simple. You just can't stay school choice, so I don't want to get into it too much, because there's not so many different families who have called me. I don't want to really out them or discuss the things that we've discussed. But they're just being honest people, because they know that they have to give their address. And so no one wants to be caught, in September, October, and we have, and say, geez, what are we doing here? And we've had a couple of those situations last year, quite frankly. So that's how the information comes to us. We do not go checking. That's not what we do. We're not knocking on doors. We're not acting on tips. We certainly will contact folks when the situation is right. We're not, going through, people's trash to figure out, where people are going. People are just letting us know because they know that they have to give us their contact information.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think the big difference this year is that we've closed school choice for every grade except for those 4 spots in kindergarten.
Sure. Yeah.
If we had opened school choice, some of this wouldn't be an issue depending on what grade these students are in. We would be able to accept them, but we have said no more new school choice.
That's right.
And the second they move, they become a new school choice applicant.
That's right. That's right.
Yep. Right. Any other questions or comments on school choice? Okay, and as I said, we'll keep this on the agenda monthly so we can review where we are and determine what impacts that we're going to have. Next up is the regional agreement. We had an RFP for consulting services that we had put out. On May 29th, I believe, the Long-Term Planning Committee got together with Dr. Casavant and Ms. Geister, and we opened up the bids, which there was only one of, for the RFP that we sent out, and reviewed the bid and compared it to what the criteria of our RFP had versus what they could offer. So I'm actually going to just throw it over to Mrs. Mattson as the chair of that long-term planning committee, to just give us a quick update on the bid that we had, which was from Mars.
Yeah. So you just want me to go over our meeting that we had?
Yeah,
Is that
really
what you
quick. Yeah.
Yep. So, yeah, like you said, it was the only one that came in, and I actually can't remember what was.
I have the paperwork right here, if you don't mind, Ms.
Good.
Mattson. would you like me
Thank
to
you.
bring- Okay.
Sorry about that, Lori.
No. Yeah, so it's hard when no one is actually together. So, we followed, the RFP process, and we only received one, in fact, proposal. That was from Mars. So, and I'll read it to you because I think I'll just read the top section, but the Mars proposal to the Narragansett Regional School District to complete a regional agreement amendment process is $15,000, which is subject to a negotiated contract. So in a part of our RFP, we sent out, there were criteria part of that. They had to be knowledgeable of the state of Massachusetts and the regional agreement, the statutes that govern that. They have to understand, in terms of the law and confidentiality, what is the RAC, which is the Regional Agreement Amendment Committee, and who makes up that. So again, it was very specific because, when you do a regional agreement or you amend one, it is pretty prescriptive. It's pretty specific. And I, quite frankly, I think we're lucky to have received, a proposal. There's not a lot of folks out there doing this type of work. Of course, Mars is, it's what they do. It's part of, one of the many wonderful things that, that they do to support regionals. So, that is in fact their proposal, and we're obviously looking to start the process by engaging them in a contract and talking about the RAC and the price and all of those type of things. But this was in fact their initial proposal.
So with that being said, what we need to do as a committee is we would need to motion to select the Massachusetts Association of Regional Schools, which is MARS, to provide consulting services for amending the regional agreement for the terms of $15,000. That was part of their proposal. So I would entertain a motion to do so.
Madam Chair, how about no more than, I would think that there's some room here. So I would say no more than 15, if you don't mind me saying that. So
Nope.
giving probably me some leeway to
Certainly, I will.
negotiate if you don't, yeah.
Yep, no, I will amend my comments then, since we didn't have an active motion, that we would motion to select the Massachusetts Association of Regional Schools, which is MARS, to provide consulting services for amending our regional agreement for an amount that will not exceed $15,000 to be negotiated by the superintendent as we enter into the contract.
So moved.
I have a motion by Mrs. Mattson. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second by Mrs. Chartier. Any questions or comments, Mrs. Trifilo?
Yes, what is the town's, both towns' responsibility toward this and agreeing to this? Do they have responsibility? Do they pay any part of it? They have to eventually accept it. So responsibility of the process helps that.
Yeah, so we actually engaged in a conversation, albeit it was, in one of our meetings, but leaders meetings. But I don't believe it certainly wasn't lost on me that neither one of the administrators was completely against, looking into the possibility of sharing the responsibility. There was no formal. Decision made, of course. We went through, we took care of the process this would be something that I would, of course, reach out to both towns and see, what their interest level. They will certainly be part of the matter of fact, they make up a good portion of the RAC committee. And so, that would be certainly a topic of conversation, but I would want the final amount first and the contract first before I really engage, in that
Okay.
conversation. Yeah.
So there is that conversation to be had.
Yes.
You're just looking for approval at this point for
Sure.
the sum.
Right.
and
Without this approval, I wouldn't have, of course, we wouldn't have,
Right.
I
Or
wouldn't-
the sharing and everything could become a part of that.
Yeah.
As they see the value of it.
Absolutely. They have both towns and the district, of course, have a very vested and equal interest.
Yes.
In amending this agreement.
Chris, is Maz the gentleman that came to spoke in front of the committee back in
Yes.
last fall? It
Yes,
was.
and he spoke about regional agreements. Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Absolutely.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, we'll take a vote on the motion of the floor, which was to select Mars to provide the consulting services for amending our regional agreement for an amount that will be no greater than $15,000 to be negotiated with Dr. Casavant for the final contract. Mrs. Matson,
Yes.
Mrs. Chartier,
Yes.
Mrs. Trifilo,
Yes.
Mr. Mason,
Aye.
Mr. Marks.
Yes.
And Mrs. Hughes says yes, so that was unanimous. And Dr. Casavant, we will turn over the contract and everything to you to work with Mars. I know that part of their proposal said they would like to get at least through committee selection in the July-August timeframe, so the
Yes.
committee could actually kick off in September. So we'll just look for an update on where we are at our next meeting.
I'll have
And-
the conversation as soon as possible.
Great, thank you. And I think that should make everyone happy. I know this has been a hot topic of discussion, and it's time that that contract was the agreement was brought up to date, so thank you. I would like to ask the group, our next item is the superintendent formative mid-cycle assessment. I have a feeling that could be a lengthier discussion. We still have quite a few items on our agenda for this evening, and I didn't know if the committee would want to move that assessment to the July timeframe. We'd be a month behind where we need to be, but in essence of time, we're already at 2 hours on this meeting, and we've got quite a bit more. If that would be acceptable to the committee?
Yes.
Yes.
All
All right, so Dr. Casavant, I apologize. I know you've prepared all sorts of backup and detail for your mid-cycle assessment, but we will bring that up at our July meeting, and we will have a lively discussion at that point and to see where we are. So we'll move on to COVID-19 updates. I know we've had some interspersed and sprinkled in already, but I know we've got a remote learning survey and some other things I'm sure that you probably want to bring up, if not here, then later on, but I will turn it over to you, Dr. Casavant.
Thank
Mrs.
you.
Hughes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mrs.
Excuse me.
Yep.
Yeah, I understand that the governor and the education secretary are going to have some announcements, in the real near future, maybe by the end of the week. Would this discussion in July tie into what's going to happen then in September based on those state recommendations? So we would then see how it's being in the results of the survey will then be incorporated in whatever this new plan is. I'm just saying that might be everything tied together would work.
Mhm.
Exactly. So we've followed the blueprint given out by the Commissioner of Ed. We put the survey out the last day of school on purpose. We've
Mhm.
had it done for, I don't know, a couple of weeks or at least. I mean, so we waited till the last day so that way folks had a full, a full dose of distance learning. We also were able to add the 2 questions that the state wanted us to put in, which was if, would you send your child back to school and would you take the bus? And I'm ballparking those questions. But those are 2 very important questions that the the state wants to know, and certainly the Commissioner of Education. I think that I'm glad we didn't put the survey out earlier, quite frankly, because we're in a lot better position now to assess our own self. I mean, again, and we've talked about this a lot. We were learning as we were going, and now we have a pretty good idea. We're able to have responded to what folks needed without the survey, meaning our teachers. We put out a teacher survey. We put out a technology survey. Yes, we put it out to the public, but we also, that was a while ago, we put it out to our staff about what they think they need, and that is going to inform a lot how we're going to react to moving forward. So we're on time, is what I mean, and we wait. I believe that by the end of this week we are going to see a news conference. I would bet on it, quite frankly, and unless something tragic happens and it gets pushed back. But I think that was always the plan. Wait till all the schools got out of, all the schools ended for the year, and then now let's go. So we're waiting like everyone else. We really can't move until we hear. This survey is timely. If people are watching this, or they, fill out that survey. We've received 352 parent surveys so far. That's been 24 hours. And we've received 150 student surveys. So not bad, right? I mean, in 24 hours. So we want to, keep that going. We're going to keep pushing it out there through Blackboard Connect, Facebook, our webpage, TCTV, I believe Susan is going to put something, or at least we're going to get to them as well, just to remind folks that way. It's really, we're going to hit every single possible avenue that we can in order to get folks to fill out the survey.
Thank you.
Right. Any other specific COVID-19 updates? I mean, this is the big one, is, everyone wants to know what's going to happen in September. We don't have an answer yet.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you what's clear as mud, quite frankly, that if you took what people were saying back in April, May, and how it was going to look, I think that has changed, quite frankly. I think that this, again, a very quick look on the survey, most people will send their child back to school, or are willing to do that. We've heard many of our senators say that if you want the economy to move, you're going to have to open daycares and you're going to have to open schools. And they are 100% right, because until you have a place, a safe place with your child for them to learn, that's how, so I don't know, I couldn't possibly know what they're discussing or wrangling at the state level at this point, but I think some of their views have changed. We will see. I just saw across that the United States had its single largest, I don't know if it was
Highest corona.
high corona since it began. So I think that'll always be that will always rule the day. So the budget also, right? We're still waiting again for the state to come out with its budget. I think that this will have a lot to do, will impact this as well. So yeah, there's not a lot to really report on until we get that messaging from the governor. And I believe that's who's going to put it out there, is the governor.
Right. Anyone have any questions or comments on that? I'm certain that by our next meeting, we'll have a lot more information. Clear as mud, I think, is the best description as of right now. Okay. We'll move on to the next item, which is the Templeton Elementary School lease agreement. It was out on the agenda to be looked at. I believe the Templeton Board of Selectmen did approve this, if I have that correct.
They did.
They did.
I was, virtually at that meeting.
Okay.
What I can confirm, and again, a lot of, without going all into it, and certainly Ms. Hughes knows, a lot of back and forth between the town of Templeton and lawyers and us and everything. So what you have before you, or was in your packet, is the final and approved, so to speak, version. It took a lot of time, but it was certainly honestly was well worth it, quite frankly, because we've never had a lease quite frankly, and it needs to be spelled out. And it took a long time, but it sits before you, and I think all parties, and certainly the town of Templeton, is pleased with it. I can say that I believe, I don't want to speak for Ms. Hughes, certainly, but we're pleased with the final results, and the process is finally over. So that's a good thing.
And I'll just add that I think the lease that you have before you that was attached to the agenda is a fair representation of a lease. There were some things that, had a lot of discussion, but what we ended up with was a decent representation of what a lease should be for a school that is used by a regional district and housed in an individual town. So.
Right.
So with that being said, and we can certainly entertain questions after we take a motion, I would entertain a motion to approve the TES lease agreement as it has been presented.
So moved.
So I have, I think it was Mrs. Trifilo was first for the motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
And, I have Mr. Marks was in just under the wire for the second on that one. What questions or comments does anybody have? Just regular things. There's no charge for the use of the school. It outlines the insurance that we'll be carrying on the school and that. So those are the normal things. Are there any questions that anyone has specifically to the content of the document?
Can I just ask, I know that I saw in there the maintenance fees, or the maintenance that we're taking on. How was the snow removal and stuff like that? Was that ever resolved?
Well, it's a great segue. So we had to get this done, which took a while. Both Rick and the DPW director, Bob, from Templeton, we talked about, we had the snow summit, remember, in I think it was February or early March, and talked about a piece of equipment that would benefit both the town and the district in removing the snow in the very tight areas that is the front parking lot. And so that became a part of the conversation about, with the monies that, quote unquote, left over from, the bond or the loan for the school, because we were under budget. So that I have that information now that we've taken care of the lease piece of this. I'm going to send that information over to the town administrator, and we will all need to meet basically to talk about in front of the select board, really, to say, look, this is our plan. And this is what we think will work. This is the equipment. Here's that kind of thing. So now it'll go before. We'll move on that. So it's next, and it has to happen, fairly soon. So that's what will be on my to-do list tomorrow, to send that over to the town hall.
Mrs. Mattson.
On that note, is that because that money was supposed to be used for the building of the school, and it's money that's left over, is that something that's going to have to be voted on by the Templeton town members?
Quite frankly, I seem to think that was, and I would defer to Mr. Mason, honestly. I have to tell you, I don't remember quite the exact path, but certainly it would have to be presented to the select board. I would have to imagine it would have to be part of a bigger vote. Mr. Mason, I guess I defer, because I obviously don't know.
Yeah, the town would also have to approve.
It benefits. So the beauty of this, quite frankly, and again, it's a proposal. It's literally a proposal. It's not, when we sat down with all the fire and the police and the school and everyone, and we figured, okay, we've got to find something to be able to maneuver and be able to move the snow, but not so big that it can't maneuver within the driveways, very tight spaces. it became clear that, and by the way, when we started talking about this, we saw that we both had a need, quite frankly, both the town and in the school. And so to have it shared made a lot of sense. And so that way, and that's really from the position we came from, and we have a snow plan, and where would we dump all those type of things. So it was a great conversation, and it was it was great to work together to kind of solve a similar problem.
So whose equipment would it be? Would it be the district's equipment, or would it be the town of Templeton's highway department?
It'd probably be the town of Templeton's, quite frankly, I believe. And I don't want to speak out of turn. Again, that it's the school, right, was purchased by the monies from Templeton, right? So I mean, I guess it would be, but we would share in its use. Again, it benefits everyone because we would operate it. We, not me, for God's sake. You wouldn't want me behind that thing, but we would operate it during the snow, to move the snow from our, parking lot, and then, I can't speak for the town, but maybe they'll use it for something that they need to do, and during the summer. So this is what we should be doing anyway. We should be working in partnership, just like, in a lot of different areas that we're trying to work together on to kind of cut costs, but also to share responsibility and manpower.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments before we vote on the motion? Okay, seeing none, we're going to vote on the motion, which was to approve the TES, or Templeton Elementary School lease agreement as it has been presented. Mrs. Mattson?
Yes.
Mrs. Chartier?
Yes.
Mrs. Trifilo?
Yes.
Mr. Mason?
Aye.
Mr. Marks?
Yes.
And Mrs. Hughes says yes, so we have unanimously approved the lease document. We can let the town of Templeton know, and we'll figure out what kind of signatures we may need to put on that, and when we can get to those signatures based upon physical proximities to the document. So
It looks like both committees would sign, and the attorneys for both. That's what the signature page looks like. So I'll reach out to figure out what the next step is.
perfect, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Next up on the agenda was just a end of year activities update. We heard from Emma about graduation for the seniors. I do know, because I just saw my son texted me, that the high school report cards came out today. So those are out. I know there's all sorts of fun things that happened. I believe, Mrs. Varney, I saw pictures of an 8th grade celebration parade, which was awesome. So I think there was a nice car parade in Phillipston as well. And Templeton Elementary, I know they did something, and it's escaping me at the moment. I know
Pre-K. They had a pre-K that came in through.
Nice. So there's been all sorts of events to commemorate the end of the school year. Any additional things that you want to put out there? I think, normal end of year things, but nothing's been.
So honestly, look, everything you just mentioned, Phillipston, the high school, the middle school, TES, for the pre-K, it was just fantastic. It speaks to the quality of course, of our staff, who really want to do something. I don't know if you saw this, but we had several teachers who went to their students' homes yesterday to say goodbye personally. And no one needs, no one forced anyone to do that. No one suggested that they do that. That's just the kind of people we have, quite frankly. But I'm gonna give honestly my biggest applause for the kids. I think it would have been very easy to feel sorry for themselves and to pout and to, and maybe they did at some point. Why wouldn't they? It was a terrible way to kind of end. But I gotta tell you, when I watched graduation, they were, they certainly appreciated the work that went into that. They were happy. It was neat. It was so personal. And they were just appreciative because they understood the circumstance and they got why this had to happen a certain way, but they appreciated that people, gave it, tried to do something special. And I think that is the takeaway for me. teachers do those things, for kids, because that's what we do. That's what they love to do. But sometimes the kids aren't but our kids were. And that, that speaks to the community and, well, quite frankly, good parenting. So you just be appreciative of what you have. You don't have to, just be thankful. And I got to tell you, I think a lot of kids were, and they really were, they said that in their own way.
Anyone have anything else to add about the end of the year? We'll move into school committee comments. Do we have any comments from the school committee? Seeing none, I just want to add one more thing to it was really an end of year event, the senior car parade that happened. I want to just give a special shout out to both Templeton and Phillipston, the emergency management services. There had to be, I don't know, more than half a dozen fire trucks and EMS vehicles and police vehicles from both towns. With my daughter being a senior, she asked me to drive her, and I tell you, I had goosebumps the whole way. It was wonderful. The community celebrated these kids. So, and as I said, just a special thanks to all the emergency services folks in both towns to make that really special for these kids. So, any other comments before we move on?
Yeah, I want to thank too the Board of Health who worked very eagerly with us to make sure that things could get done for kids. And, Mrs. Weider as their agent really went above and beyond getting a lot of that approved.
She did. She was fantastic.
Yeah.
She really was. She was a big help, a huge help, quite frankly. So yes, definitely a thanks to Ms. Weider.
All right. Now we're going to move on to new business. The first piece of new business is our fiscal year 21 rate card approval, which, and don't mind me as I look over, I have some up on my screen. This is the rates that we will be paying for teacher substitutes, nurses, all sorts of things that we put the rates down so that we have an approved amount that we're paying our employees either hourly or per day. And we update this every year. There are two rates on the card because I believe January 1 is the minimum wage goes up again, I believe is what we see there. So we need to reflect our wage card having that change as well. So I would entertain a motion to approve the FY21 rate card as it has been presented.
So moved.
Mr. Mason has motion. Do I have a second?
Second,
I think that was Mrs. Matson with a second, maybe. Did I get that right?
yes.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments on the rate card?
I have one. I'm just looking at the non-contractual recess cafeteria monitor. Should that go up to $13.50 on January 1st? It says $12.75. I mean, everything else is going up to $13.50 with the minimum wage.
It's correct on the copy I have in front of me. I guess just the one I posted for you is wrong.
Yeah, it says $12.75. That's all right. All right.
Yeah, so that, because I'm looking too, I see 1275. So it would be the 1350, just to
Yes.
clarify. Okay, so that's the official version. So I would, we should probably make an amended motion since what was attached to the agenda that we saw has the incorrect rate on it. So I would entertain, Mr. Mason, yes, you've amended the motion to change the non-contractual recess / cafeteria monitor to be $13.50 an hour instead of the $12.75 that was on the sheet we saw. And who was my second? I think Mrs. Matson, will you agree to the second on that
I
amendment?
do agree to the second.
All right, any other questions? Seeing none, roll call, Mrs. Matson,
Yes.
Mrs. Chartier,
Yes.
Mrs. Trifilo,
Yes.
Mr. Mason,
Aye.
Mr. Marks,
Yes.
and Mrs. Hughes says yes, so we have an official rate card for FY21. Next up, we have surplus items. I would enter, this is all due to year end. We've had teachers who have presented things and been recommended by the administration for surplusing. So I would entertain a motion to surplus outdated 8th grade text, including 130 text and 2 teacher manuals of Glencoe Science, Science Level Blue. The student activities bus, or as we call her, Sparky. We are going to surplus that, and various music equipment, including a piano and bench, 2 music cabinets, obsolete audio equipment, drum shells, cymbal stands that are broken, rain jackets and ponchos, plus some hat boxes, excuse me. I would entertain a motion to surplus those items.
So
So
moved.
moved.
I have a motion by Mrs. Chartier. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
And I have a second by Mr. Marks. Any questions or comments on any of those items? Seeing none, we'll do a roll call. Mrs. Matson? You're muted? Yep.
Yes.
Mrs. Chartier?
Yes.
Mrs. Trifilo?
Yes.
Mr. Mason?
Aye.
Mr. Marks?
Yes.
And Mrs. Hughes says yes. So we have voted to surplus that equipment. I'm also going to make a recommendation that we put off having a conversation of the shared services inquiry from Quabbin that came through Mars. I would like to recommend that we refer this item to maybe the long-term planning committee for discussion, rather than do it as a full committee up front. If that's okay with the committee, I would entertain a motion to assign that task to the long-term planning committee.
So moved.
I have a motion by Mrs. Trifilo. Do I have a second?
Second.
And I have a second by Mrs. Matson. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, we'll vote on moving the shared services inquiry to be addressed by the long-term planning subcommittee, which will then report back to the committee. Mrs. Matson,
Yes.
Mrs. Chartier,
Yes.
Mrs. Trifilo,
Yes.
Mr. Mason,
Aye.
Mr. Marks,
Yes.
and Mrs. Hughes says yes. So that was unanimous. So we will address that. The long-term planning subcommittee will address that and report back. Next up is a COVID-19 state funding resolution. The Massachusetts Association of School Committees has recommended that we take up this resolution rather than waiting for November because it is time sensitive. Basically, as everyone I think probably heard, the state came out with PPE guidelines, and they have given us directive on what we will need to provide in the schools when we go back. There's a cost associated with that. There's no information on how we're supposed to fund it. So, and actually this started as an initiative between the school committee member in Amherst, Peter Demling, and Narissa Wallen from Triton. They worked together and they put this resolution together. It was then picked up by MASC, who forwarded it out to everybody for review and approval. So I hope everyone's had a chance to take a look at this. Basically what it says is the state must guarantee every school district full reimbursement for whatever COVID-19 expenses are required to follow the state mandates, and that we must ensure a statewide school reopening that is safe, responsible, and equitable. There can be no unfunded mandates for COVID-19. So I put this in front of you to consider that we pass this. If we do, then we'll forward it on to the legislators and the governor, and hopefully as a united front, all of the school districts that are passing this, and I think they've got 60 some odd as of this morning, there'll be some good strength in those numbers, you know, getting the message out that we can't be expected to pay for items that are not in our budget when we don't even know what our budget's going to be. So I would entertain a motion to, let's see, how did I write that? Let's see the name, to pass our school committee resolution, the COVID-19 state funding resolution.
So moved.
I have a motion by Mrs. Matson. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second by Mrs. Chartier. Are there any questions or comments from the committee on the resolution? Seeing none, we'll do a vote. Mrs. Matson,
Yes.
Mrs. Chartier,
Yes.
Thank you. Mrs. Trifilo,
Yes.
Mr. Mason,
Aye.
Mr. Marks. Oh, can't hear you, Mr. Marks, sorry.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And Mrs. Hughes says yes. So I will put together a litany of emails and or written correspondence with the various people that this is sent addressed to let them know that we support. And I'm also going to report back in through MASC that we have passed this resolution so they can add us to the list. So I thank you for taking the time to review that and pass that. Next up was a second resolution that MASC had put in front and asked us to put in front of our committees on anti-racism. I would just like to comment that based on some of the feedback that I'm reading out on the listserv, and I don't know if any others of you have heard any of the chatter, there's been some discussion about making this more of a holistic resolution. And one thing that I think pertains to us as a district is is the name of our mascot and our logo, which I think we just need to have a further conversation about before we entertain this particular resolution, to make sure that we're okay with all the components and all the various parts of this anti-racism resolution. I think on its merits, it stands well, but I think there's a lot more to it. So I'm happy to entertain a motion to see if it passes. I'm also happy to get feedback from others if they think we should have a further discussion before we put this up for vote.
I think I'd like to have some further discussion, review it and have some further discussion.
Does that make sense to the committee?
Yeah,
does.
maybe in the July meeting.
Okay. All right. So what I'll do is I'll try and pull some information together that I'm seeing out there, and I'll try and forward that to everybody so you can have some things to think about as we decide how we handle this resolution. As I said, on its own, it has merit. I just want to be sure we're inclusive to everybody as we address this. Okay. Next up, the appointment of the Director of Pupil Personnel Services. So Dr. Casavant, you would bring us up to date and make your recommendation, please.
I'm good, I'm not muted. Okay, so Dr. Salvatos notified me, this is, probably late May, early June, that he was in the running and was a finalist in Athol. And so once he was appointed, we, as quickly as possible, posted the position, and we formulated a committee, a great committee, a fantastic committee, honestly. But we had 25 applicants that applied in a very short amount of time. And we, of course, everything was virtual, and we were able to narrow it down to roughly, 6, and then of course down to 4 finalists. So it was and I've told all certainly the committee knows, but the candidates, I let them know that this was probably one of the most competitive, interviews that I've been a part of in a very long time. Honestly, there were 4 candidates that were outstanding, and it really gave us a lot to think about. And every time that you get in those situations, that is a great thing. So when you really have to think about who's best for the position, that's a win. So it is my pleasure to at least present to you Mr. Matthew Holloway, who was by far, even with this incredibly strong group of people, unanimous pick of the group. And then, of course, I did my vetting and spoke to various people, and of course, himself. He is the Director of Pupil Services in Greenfield Public Schools currently. He is a local guy from Ash West. I promised I would do my best not to hold that against him. No promises, but we will see what we can do. He comes with just an incredible resume. He has worked in a lot of different places. He's worked in a lot of different levels. He's done a lot of different things. And I think that and again, we had, Mr. Marks and Mrs. Triplo on the committee, his experience with some of the things that we need to strengthen, but some of the things that we do pretty well, it really was a great fit. So I couldn't speak highly enough of him. I could, but it's getting on in time. But I recommend, or at least, pardon me, I submit to you, Mr. Matthew Holloway. You have his information, and certainly would love to hear what Ms. Triflo and Mr. Marks have to say about that as well.
Just for a point of order, Mrs. Trifolo's iPad ran out of power.
Oh, geez.
So she did drop off. She is going to plug in and hopefully be able to join us shortly. So we'll see how lucky she will be with finding an outlet and making that happen. So with that being said, Mr. Marks, if you have any commentary you want to add.
Yeah, so actually, I think Chris did a great job. First of all, I just want to, want to mirror his remarks about the committee. I think we had a really great committee, and I'd like to thank them personally. I just want to say that I think that Matt was very knowledgeable. He was passionate, and I think he'll be a great asset to the NRSD team. So I welcome him aboard. Chris, do we know when? Do we have a start date?
I think that if the and again, I wanted to be mindful of your appointment, but I think it would be relatively soon. We never got into that because I wanted to make sure that the committee was in approval, but we've already had all the important conversations, so there will be no lag. Let's put it that way. So I would believe in the very, very near future, a couple weeks or something to that effect. So that's the within the next 2 weeks. He'll be on station. He's ready to go. I know that for a fact.
Mrs. Trifolo, welcome back. Just for the record, Mrs. Trifolo has now rejoined the conversation. Did you want to add any commentary with regards to the proposal for Matthew Holloway as our new Pupil Personnel Services Director?
No, I didn't hear Mr. Mark's comments, but I know that I agreed with them. He is candidate that I think will serve the district well. So I was very pleased he comes with some good qualifications. And we're lucky to get him actually at this time of year.
Okay, so with that being said, upon the recommendation of Dr. Casavant and the commentary from Mrs. Trifolo and Mr. Marks, who thank you very much, sat on the committee of the hiring committee, I would entertain a motion to appoint Matthew Holloway as the Director of Pupil Personnel Services.
So moved.
I have a motion by Mr. Marks. Do I have a second?
Second.
And I have a second. I think Mrs. Trifolo beat whoever to the punch there. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, we'll do roll call. Mrs. Matson?
Yes.
Mrs. Chartier?
Yes.
Mrs. Trifolo?
Yes.
Mr. Mason?
Aye.
Mr. Marks?
Yes.
And Mrs. Hughes says yes. So we have a unanimous vote, and congratulations for our new candidate, Mr. Holloway, as our Director of Pupil Personnel Services, and we'll turn that over to Dr. Casavant to work through the contract and get him on board ASAP. We're very happy to have him here.
We are very lucky.
Great, thank you. All right, we're almost done. Other items not reasonably anticipated. I think we've covered everything. Superintendent report, FY20 enrollment. Is there anything else, Dr. Casavant?
Just, we don't have to do the enrollment, obviously, because we've talked about school choice. I do want to recognize some, again, we've had some personnel shifts. And again, given the space of time that's taken place between the meetings. So we already know about Dr. Solivardis moving over to Athol and, wishing him well. Miss Shantae Gilson will also be moving on. She's going to go, and I always, it's Hampton Wilbraham, Hampton Wilbraham. It's Wilbraham, Hampton Wilbraham. But she'll be moving on as well to be the principal of the K2 school there. I can tell you that the folks that met her were just blown away, and that doesn't surprise me, quite frankly. We know about Mr. Young, Colby Young, take Ms. Vassal, who will be the principal at Nantucket High School, had to get that right, who tells us there is a whale skeleton that hangs in the foyer of her high school, which, what can you ask for, right? But she's moving on. We're very happy for her. So we needed to hire an assistant principal, and we're in that process. And Kate did a fantastic job, as always, with these processes. And Janet, her name is, the candidate is Miss Janet Brown. She comes to us from the Harvard Public Schools. She is the ELA director, amongst many other things. Again, another very, very competitive process, just like the high school process. And if I may, good people just don't go anywhere just to work. I think that that's a real testament to the district at this point. We're generating a lot of interest and our desired location for folks. So that we said our goodbyes yesterday, being in the last day of school. The folks that I mentioned will be coming aboard at various times, but very, very quickly, because we need a lot to do with moving forward. Distance learning survey, just want to keep saying it over again. I just say, if you're hearing my voice right now, you're watching this, tell your friends, well, make sure that they have children in the district, but please fill out the survey, both for your children and for yourselves as parents. We want your feedback. We need to know what we've done well, what we didn't do so well, what we can improve on. It's the only way that we can really get a handle on what we need to happen moving forward. In terms of that, I think that honestly, I can't think of anything else that we have not covered within this time frame. So it has been another busy year. But we did it. And I'm very thankful for the folks that I have around me, especially the folks that are in these little squares right here who do lion's share of the work and keep me focused, which is a task on itself. So I want to thank them personally for all their hard work.
Great. And we thank them as well. Great. Curriculum materials up.
I have one more. I thought I spoke about Miss Ashley Niggle. She is we hired her as well. She is the school psychologist. We'll be filling that. And she'll also do some supervision work with just like Abby did prior to her leaving. She will supervise and really act as kind of a second in charge to the PPS director, but more for the social emotional piece and that crew. So I'm sorry, I did forget one. I thought I brought her aboard before last meeting, but not. She's also in the fold.
Great.
Sorry, and thank you, Susan.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like we have wonderful candidates we're bringing on board. Look forward to hopefully physically meeting them. I don't know when that'll happen, if we'll get there August, September, whatever time frame. If not, we will virtually like to do that. So we'll work on when we'll have those introductions happen, but please welcome them all on our behalf as well. So next up, Kate, we were going to purchase some curriculum materials, and just per our policy, we just asked that you just give us a highlight of what they are and what we're using them for, so that we're on board with all of that.
Sure. I just want to, before I do that, echo Dr. Cassavant's statements about both the people that are moving on from our district, who have really contributed strongly to our district, and the candidates or the new hires that we have coming. We have a really solid leadership team, and it's awesome to see that that's going to continue with these new hires. So for the curriculum materials, we purchased mathematics textbooks at the high school, which in fact actually include grade 8 Algebra 1. So it's grade 8 Algebra 1. So it's Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2. The department looked at various textbooks that we got samples from publishers and used a rubric to really pick those materials apart and choose the best program for us. And they chose Reveal Math which is a McGraw-Hill product. It's an excellent product, and they made a really good choice. And then we followed a similar process with history in middle school. So that was driven somewhat by the change in the frameworks that came out last year, and really requires civics in grade 8, which entirely changes the progression of standards through middle school and into high school. So while we were looking at those civics books, we really chose to look at middle school as a whole. And we use the same kind of process with a rubric and so forth. And they also coincidentally chose a McGraw-Hill product, which is, give me 1 second here, which includes grade 6 World Geography and Ancient Civilizations 1, grade 7 World Geography and Ancient Civilizations 2, and then grade 8 Government and Civics, Civic Life. And they're not going to, in grade 8, they will entirely use the civics book. In grade 6 and 7, they're going to use the 2 books together and kind of repackage those units, and they're completely aligned to Massachusetts standards, which is terrific. And we were able to, since grade 5 is moving to the middle school, we were able to buy the grade 5 matching textbook series, which is US, North American US history in the first decades of the Republic up through the Civil War. So we have a good set of textbooks now for history and social studies in middle school 5 through 8, really, which now 8 is in high school, and the math books.
Great. Well, thank you. Anyone have any questions or comments on those? It sounds like you did a deep dive, and all the staff that were involved and picked out some good curriculum materials. Anyone have any questions or comments? Okay, well, thank you, and please send along our thanks to everyone involved.
I do want to just add quickly that kind of along with the earlier conversation that you had about I'm looking for what it was called, the anti-racism resolution. Just so that it is noted, all of our textbook reviews include a bias review. So that was one of the components of the rubric that was used in all cases. That it's standard procedure for us, but it's just good to highlight in these times when this is such an issue that anti-racism and anti-bias components are looked at when we purchase those books.
Thank you. That's very important in light of things today. So thank you for pointing that out. All right. Any other questions or comments? Okay, so we're going to do a quick run through our subcommittee reports, because I think we've covered everything. Academic, administrative. I don't want to put words in Mrs. Trifolo's mouth, but I think we focused on the audit and just other remote learning things, which we've covered. So if there's nothing else to add, I will move on. Finance. We don't really have an update yet because we haven't had another finance meeting. Facilities. Don't know if we've got if the facilities committees had a chance to meet and discuss anything.
No.
No? Okay. We'll look for an update hopefully at our next meeting. I know Dr. Kazavant, you're going to be keeping our facilities staff very busy with projects. So maybe at our next meeting, we could do a little deeper dive into some of the things going on. Long-term planning, we've already discussed the RFP for the Regional Agreement Amendment Committee. So we've got our charge there. Templeton Elementary School Building Committee. I know you're still meeting. Any important
So
updates?
yeah, we still have to pay bills and stuff, but we're near the end.
Okay. Well, it'll be a good day when you report in that we are at the end. So that'll be good.
Well, they still have to do its audit, but yeah.
Okay. And the PMES Building Committee, I know that hasn't met at all, so no update there. I know there hasn't been any correspondence. that needs to get read out loud. School committee meeting dates. We do have our next meeting for Wednesday, July 15th, scheduled for 5 p.m. and it'll be on the Zoom platform. I just want to say thank everyone for hanging in there for, we're almost at 3 hours tonight. And I'm certain in July we'll have a decent agenda too, and I appreciate everyone hanging in there with us. So July 15th, 5 o'clock will be the next meeting, unless something comes up and we'll need to meet earlier, which we will be in touch if that's the case. And with that, I'm going to give anyone a last chance or opportunity to bring anything else up or make a comment. Because seeing none, then we need to go into executive session this evening. And I don't know, Mrs. Varney, if or Mr. Castle is on to send us to a breakout room or how that'll work. But that'll be after we make our motion, we'll have that happen. So I would entertain a motion to enter into executive session for reason number 3, which is to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining or litigation with the UFCW and or the NDEA, if an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining or litigating position of the public body and the chair so declares. This meeting will not return to open session immediately following. So do I have a motion?
So move.
I believe that was Mr. Marks. Do I have a second?
Second,
And I have a second by Mrs. Mattson. Mrs. Mattson. Oop, you're on mute, sorry.
yes.
Okay, Mrs. Chartier,
Yes.
Mrs. Trifilo,
Yes.
Mr. Mason,
Aye.
Mr. Marks,
Yes.
and Mrs. Hughes says yes. So once again, I just want to thank everyone for hanging in there with us for this very lengthy meeting, but had so many wonderful components to it. And we will see everybody July 15th from the public's perspective. And we can, I guess, stop our recording and head off to our breakout room for our executive session. So thank you.
Thank you, Margaret.
The recording is stopped. Let me just end the YouTube stream.
Great.